Welcome back to Shared Humanity. I am Nelba Márquez-Greene, and in this podcast and video series, I talk to the humans behind the headlines of gun violence in a moment in history where all too often we focus on everything but our shared humanity. Today's guest is Abbey Clements, and Abbey Clements and I share a unique link. She was a teacher at Sandy Hook School, and she was a teacher on Sandy Hook School December 14th, 2012, where I lost a daughter and where Abbey survived. And in today's episode, she's going to talk to us a bit about her activism and where she is now, what survivor guilt looks like, part of her evolution of grief, and what it's like to have all of this in her, in front of a mom who lost a child. And we're just grateful for her sharing. Do you remember the first day we met?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Nelba. We've known each other for a long time, and I do remember the first day we met. It was, if I'm right, it was before the school year started. I was setting up my classroom.
What year? So 2012.
So, right, 2012. And our secretary brought your beautiful family.
That's right.
For a tour.
Yep.
Of our beautiful school.
Of our beautiful school, Sandy Hook School. And I get to meet you. And you are setting up your classroom and so excited for this school year.
And I can see in my mind's eye, as I can very clearly, then your beautiful family coming in and our husbands, our colleagues. And I was very excited to meet Jimmy, to say hello and to welcome him, welcome you guys both to Sandy Hook School. I'm excited that he is starting at WestCon.
So we walk into your classroom and we realize that we don't just have the kind of common experience of we're both going to be at this school. Our husbands are actually educators at a different school together at Western Connecticut State University. So smallest of worlds. I get to meet you, and it's obvious that you love teaching. Tell me what you loved so much about teaching. You were teaching 32 years.
32 years.
About that evolution, about how you got started, and just some of the lessons you took away from that experience.
Well, my mother was a teacher. I never thought I'd be a teacher. Went to college, majored in philosophy and French, and I had no intention of being a teacher. But that changed. I took a job in Manhattan for a travel magazine, and I remember hanging up a phone call that I took and saying to myself, this is not what I want. I want to make a difference, and I love kids, and so I want to be a teacher. And it came out of nowhere, and I had to go back to school because I didn't study education. And I never looked back. For me, even after the tragedy, connecting with kids and having fun with them and watching them learn and seeing that spark has always been what's kept me in teaching and what I loved about teaching.
Yeah, I could feel it. Even in that first day when I'm watching you set up your classroom. You had real teacher energy, the joy and the fun and the making things exciting. Do you have a favorite year of teaching? Do you have a favorite?
I don't. I remember kids really clearly. Sometimes I forget their names, of course, but I have all of the photos from the time I started, those class photos. But for sure, the years post-tragedy, the kids who I had that year, my then second graders, who most of whom finished their first year of college now, I'm close with about 6 or 7 of them. Mm-hmm. And even if I don't know them now, outside of that little crew, they're watching. And they're watching gun violence unfold over and over on their phones, in the news, the stories that make the news. And I feel a tremendous responsibility and always have after.
You represent a cohort of teachers that almost never gets talked about. You represent a cohort of teachers impacted directly by gun violence in the United States. And before we go there specifically, we talked a little bit about the first day we met, that extraordinary energy, that belief in hope, excitement for a new school year, not unlike many Americans are facing right now. The next day we meet in person is a little different. The next day we meet in person is actually in a firehouse. And we have two very different experiences, but two experiences inextricably linked by gun violence. What would you say to anyone listening?
We have a problem in this country, and it's gun violence. Our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, just designated gun violence as a public health crisis. It is the leading cause of death of children in this country. So it's pervasive. Almost everyone knows someone if they haven't been impacted by gun violence. And it's going to take all of us to pay attention to this problem. Like, one of the reasons why my friends and I started Teachers Unify is that we really haven't seen a surge of programming and curricula coming out of education spaces on this issue. And really, it's going to take every intersectional group, organization, space to make a commitment to try to curb gun violence. And you're right now, but we don't hear from educators, paraeducators, administrators. It's just, and I think there are complicated reasons for that. I don't think it's necessarily for a deceptive reason why we don't hear from us. But we need to tell the stories. We need to break down the stigma of why can't you haven't moved on? What's taking you so long? I think it's complicated by the way we approach grief in this country, and we're expected to just swallow it and go back to work in a heartbeat.
There's so much you just said right now that I really want to. First, you talked about Teachers Unify, which I definitely want to make sure we get to and spend lots of time on. You just touched on something, though, that I think is the primary myth of maybe why we don't hear from groups most impacted, including teachers. We kind of have an expectation that teachers will just go back, that people after these kinds of events will just go back. And I certainly saw that. You know what? Let me dial it back a little bit. First of all, it's just a miracle that we're having this conversation.
It is.
You and I hold very different places and positions in the post-tragedy tragedy circle in Newtown, right? Like, I'm in this circle as a bereaved parent. You are in this circle as a teacher who was in the building and also impacted. Then there are first responders and people who survived and witnesses and so many other places. This is very rare that people in different parts of the circle actually talk. How are you feeling right now? Is it a little strange?
Well, it's certainly not easy because because of that survivor guilt, that piece that just has been with me and is a common experience in people who survive something really hard when the worst happened to people who you knew, who were part of the community, even if you didn't know them directly. So that piece, I think it'll always be there. Like, my God, like, I would do anything to have changed the trajectory of this. But to have the opportunity to spend time in the same space with you means so much to me, because not only on a personal level, because I adore you and your family, But because I think breaking down these barriers, which really aren't there, but it's just part of, I think, the grieving process and what
Mhm.
society expects and what's expected of us in our daily lives that cause sometimes a rift, or not even a rift, but like you're just afraid to even, you might say the wrong thing, or you don't know if that person might approve of the way that you're moving through the aftermath, where you want that, but you also respect so much their own paths that you don't even want to impose on that space. So although it's complicated, I think it's really important. And if we want everyone in this country to pay attention to this issue, to hold legislators and candidates accountable on this issue, then we have to be able to talk about it. And we want people who've never been impacted. One of our co-founders has never been. And I know even she feels like this imposter syndrome on that. I'm like, my God, I would never want you to be personally impacted. But we are all survivors of gun violence in this country. We are all impacted because of the pervasiveness of it and the fear.
So one common myth is that, you should just be able to go back after a violent act and kind of save everyone else as a teacher. Another one is that after tragedy, and you just talked about this, that we'll all kind of have the same perspective. And when we don't have a same perspective, that there is conflict, right? And I guess depending on where you are in the circle after tragedy, on which concentric ring, you may hold a different perspective. I remember someone from Newtown coming up to me and saying, "Why won't you let us march in front of the school on December 14th?" First of all, I didn't have that much power. I was just busy trying to survive, but it seemed like no matter where you were in the ring, there was a different kind of approach or idea of what should happen. And even within those circles, there were also different opinions, but a few things tied us. And that's number one, that we all survived an event that happened December 14th, 2012, that we are all impacted by grief on that day and every day since, that we are all trying to find a voice and a way forward, that this has an impact on our family no matter where we are on the ring, and that we're trying to figure out ways to move forward without hurting one another, without
Right.
creating conflict. And you've been really clear on that. What does your grief look like today?
I I think I carry that responsibility from my students that day.
Right.
Take that very seriously. But also, same with you. I think, and other friends I have who have been more impacted, and I don't know where that comes from. Probably just, wanting reassurance from people who you really care about, that, that there's a respect, and at least you're doing things in a respectful way without losing sight of the magnitude and the personal pieces, the narratives that are so important to raise when it comes to gun violence. And then there's now the responsibility of Teachers Unify to make sure that I'm trying to get a seat at the table for people who really don't get that when it comes to conversations about safety and protocols and what it's like after a tragedy like this.
It struck me as you were speaking that every other guest we've had on the podcast has been someone who's lost a family member, a child or a parent to gun violence. And that very often we don't count people who don't lose a person as victims of gun violence. How does gun violence impact you uniquely?
So this is a hard question for me because, again, so much worse could have happened and did happen. So I tend not to want to talk about it, but I think it's also important to talk about. So just among people who, my colleagues and also people who I've met, other survivors in the gun violence prevention movement who have also survived school shootings. There's the physical changes because the rise of anxiety, and that could cause certain things in crowds, physical manifestations sometimes, especially when I'm talking about it, that those are harder. And then there are things, relationships that change depending on what direction you may have gone to in terms of moving forward.
Right.
And it really does shift things in a family and within your friends. And that's really hard. And it also affects your work. I think my husband is a writer and also a professor at Western Connecticut State University. And for him, his writing completely changed. And he couldn't write for many years. And I know he doesn't like to talk about that either because he's like, well, my God, so, but those things are real. And a decision to stay in the same workplace, a decision to stay in the same town, all of those are very, very real and difficult decisions that people have to make when they're impacted by a tragedy of this magnitude.
I think it's really important to say that while this conversation might be uncomfortable, it is critically important to have, because every individual and every concentric ring after tragedy feels something, right? We don't feel the same things. And thank goodness. I don't want for you to have lost a person in order to make this real.
Right.
Right? I'm actually, I want you to know that as far as for me, I'm thankful you didn't lose a person. I'm just sad I lost a person.
I know. And
I'm incredibly grateful for your willingness to engage in this conversation, because I know it must be terrifying to sit across from a parent and say, here's how it impacted me. So thank you for taking that risk. Part of relationship takes risks, but in order to take those risks, you have to have a foundation of trust. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of working really hard to have trusting relationships, because that is the foundation for where we can take these risks to create solutions, to create understanding, to have community. Survivors need community. I mean, if we can get an amen at any point in this, it's going to be right here. Survivors need community. But so often that community is interrupted by all of the gobbledygook that comes from the outside and sometimes from inside each other, because we're just trying to survive.
Right.
Did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, I think you're right 100%. And I know that it often feels very lonely in that space where you don't know, you're suddenly, you don't even really recognize who you are. And now you're wanting to do things completely outside of your comfort zone. And your friends aren't really into it. And so, but it was the community for me that got me through it. And it wasn't, it was more of a survivor and advocacy community where I found people who suddenly found themselves wanting to do things that were outside of their comfort zone too, to try even in the smallest ways to make a change.
You talked about an element that is unique to you and outside of my circle, and that's survivor guilt. What does survivor guilt mean and look like to you?
I think, and if you read different things about Holocaust survivors, there's this similar, why did he turn left instead of right? It was the second classroom on the right. What do you do with that? What do you do with that feeling of I know the word lucky is like a terrible word in the gun violence space, but ew, like to have that to be like who I was, that I was, survived with my kids running out of that um, building that day. So I often say, what do I do with that? It's a weight, and it's been there from that day. And I don't think I knew what to do with it. And I knew I had to be a little bit patient because I knew I had to go back for those students in just a few days. But
Had to or chose to?
so it is kind of a common weird thing. I mean, not all of us obviously feel this way, but where the responsibility to be there gave you direction and told you what, like it led you as to what to do in those days, hours after. So you just kind of, you just kind of, you were like, well, of course I'm going to be there for my kid. Like, how am I not going to show up? I have to be there. There was not a question. And then it was the same for the following year. And you hear this as a common experience, that there was a clear responsibility and that you just knew you were going to be there for those kids, the kids after. But then you also, there's a commonality in some school shooting survivors who then, when maybe the kids all graduate or you don't have any more siblings coming through or as many, then you think, now you get to really ask the question, is this really good for me? Is this what I want to be doing? Is this right? I didn't even take a breath, except in the summertime where we didn't know what to do with ourselves with that time.
I still don't know that this is a phenomenon that the regular public who has been spared this experience, perhaps they haven't had an active mass tragedy happen in one school district in one day, in one school building in one day. I don't know that it's something people understand. The amount of fortitude, that's why I want to frame it as a choice. Because if we just frame it as an automatic, then we don't recognize and I don't want to say heroism, but we don't recognize there are no, sometimes I get mad at myself because I can't think of the right words. And then I say, no, give yourself grace because you can't think of the right words because this is pretty horrific, right? But you and other teachers, my sons included, went back and committed to being a stable, predictable force for siblings who had lost siblings and for students who had experienced the worst. And I can tell you that as a mother, the way our family survived those early days was knowing that Isaiah had that one thing. And Isaiah's teacher that returned that year, last year attended his graduation from high school. And we could not be more grateful to her. And yet we recognize, just from our perspective outside of her circle, the cost it must have for her to have done that. Seems like we are a country that romanticizes teachers after they die in a school shooting, but doesn't give them what they need while they're living to show up every day to teach our kids. And if I could change one thing, that's what it would be. It's great to romanticize people after they're gone. How about we support them while they're here? So I can get a little heated about that, but let me go on. You were explaining to me about survivor guilt and the importance and how it gave you kind of purpose and direction for going back. I do want to make sure I don't gloss over that too was a choice. And whatever choice you make for your family, we should respect. As a family in that school, I do want to recognize, though, that we benefited from that choice of teachers returning and honor so much.
Even my son's teacher at the time, he was at Reed School, his teacher, when I saw her again in January, put her hands on my shoulders and said, I will take care of Jacob. You just leave that to me a little bit. She showed up too.
Yep.
And I was like so incredibly, I'll always be incredibly grateful. I just told her that recently in an email that we recently connected on. So I think that teachers were not sharpshooters. We are not taught what to do as part of our teacher certification, and is to like check this box if you're willing to be a shield in a situation, but you just would as you would with any loved one. So obviously when they come back, if you can and if it's the right thing for you, then we did. But it certainly wasn't easy, and you always felt like people were watching you to make sure that, I mean, and I get that in a way, because I when I came back and we were in that other building, I didn't want anybody to leave for a second. So every time they had to go to the bathroom, I would take the entire class with me. I was like, nobody is leaving my side for a little while.
The nest you made, right?
That's what it is.
We were all trying to make some kind of nest.
Yeah.
And that is understandable.
Yeah.
I will stop for a second to tell you a story. So that happened in December, and Anna Grace's birthday was in April. And I don't know if you've ever heard me tell the story that Isaiah comes home from school in March and says, "What are we going to do for Anna's birthday?" And I say, "I don't know. What would you like to do?" And he says, "I would really like to have a We Just Dance party because Anna really loved We." And I'm thinking to myself, I have to call his teacher, who has just survived a school shooting alongside my son, and tell her that this child would like a We Just Dance party at school for his sister, and to just kind of feel her out and see if this is something we're going to put together at school or at home, because he also wanted to do it with his classmates. And this teacher that I called just to, and then I think she may have called me and said, "How would you like us to honor Anna's birthday?" And I said, "Well, Isaiah wants a We Just Dance party, but I completely understand if this isn't something that could happen." To which she responded, "We've got this." Yeah. And this teacher pulled in a big TV into the cafeteria. There were many adults involved, and We just danced on that April 4th in honor of Anna Grace. And that is something that I will forever be grateful for. So to the teachers of Sandy Hook School, of any of them who are listening to this, just if you went home, I thank you. If you took care of your family, I thank you. If you went to work and that's how you took care of your family, I thank you. In every way you did, and you are still here, I thank you for that. So pivoting now to, you keep talking about responsibility, and you felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. And part of how you operationalize your sense of responsibility, and you're still being here, your survivor guilt too, was in activism. Tell me about your evolution of activism.
I mean, I was always somebody who, I voted, I paid attention to the news. Definitely, as a parent, made sure that there were foundations that you pass along about right and wrong and justice and injustices of this country. And went to a few protests in my 20s, but I wouldn't have called myself an activist before what happened. And I wasn't really planning it, but our daughter at the time was 16, and she was the first one in the family to become an activist.
Sarah, who's amazing, who's in law school right now at George Washington. Hi, Sarah.
At Georgetown.
Oh,
no, that's fine.
Georgetown. Sorry.
It's still DC. It's all good. Yes, she, in fact, I would drive her to meetings and wait in the car. I even remember like getting out of the car and waiting in the hall. She was taking a long time or something, and like hiding behind the wall. Like I wasn't ready yet. And she mobilized and got involved right away. And then I was actually invited to an event at somebody's house I didn't know, and we were going to go together. So I was like, I think I can do this. It was toward the end of the school year, been a few months now. Thought I could do it with her. And then my daughter couldn't go. I said, well, I'm not going to go. I can't go by myself. But I decided to go and found my way. It was confusing directions. Went into a house where that was full of people dedicated to having a conversation about gun violence and about what it's like in Connecticut now. Oh my gosh, what happened here and what can we do? And I immediately felt like these were my people. I just knew it in my bones. It was like, I think might be able to do this. I actually I told my story for the first time in front of people I didn't know. And there was not a dry eye in the room. People were, as we know from our tragedy, forever changed and in such fear and such grief about what happened just in a town nearby that they were just activated. And I loved that feeling like I'm going to work with these people and we're going to go to farmers markets and sign people up and talk to people, just whatever it was. I know I wasn't thinking like that there were going to necessarily be laws changed. In fact, I was very cynical and knew where we came from and knew where we were at this moment and what it was looking like in terms of any possibility for federal change. But I just knew it. And from there, I went to a conference. I was invited to travel to Denver, and I met survivors from different tragedies, and there's just a bond there. And listening to their stories and just had this sense that these were the people I needed to be around.
And you went from that to joining groups to starting your own. Tell us about Teachers Unify.
So I volunteered I was a Moms Demand Action volunteer for 10 years, almost a decade. And it's great. They have different opportunities for you to do. I started out one thing, ended up doing, 3 other things. They have a survivor network. I'm still involved with their survivor network, and I met incredible people I'm still friends with today from the Everytown programs and opportunities that they have for volunteering. But along the way, I was always waiting for a teacher organization. I was always aware that there was kind of a population, a very large population of working people who are on the front lines of this issue, who haven't really been brought in personally to the movement. And I was kind of hoping and waiting, and I would talk to different groups about it. And that's a good idea. And like we've been thinking about it, but it didn't really it hadn't happened yet. And after yet another school shooting, this time in Oxford, Michigan, on November 30th of 2021, 2 activist teacher friends of mine and I were in a group chat, very much like group chats that Americans have across the country after these heinous shootings happen over and over. Are you okay? Oh my God, did you see the news? What is happening again? It's like a hamster wheel. What are we doing? Where are the teachers? We never hear from the teachers. Why don't we ever hear from the teachers? So we're texting, and I said to them, why is there no national organization for teachers by teachers? Do you want to start it? Do you want to start one? And they said yes. And all full-time teachers. One is a survivor of the Parkland tragedy, and one is a New York City activist, and they just jumped right on it. We had a name. They are fast and they are savvy. We had our website, everything within a matter of days. And I'm so proud of where we are almost 3 years into this. We have about 15,000
Wow.
educators and supporters.
Wow.
This is retired people, paraeducators, counselors. When we say teachers, we mean everybody
You
who works
mean
in a
educators, staff, anyone within
Exactly.
the network of school buildings.
Exactly, including retired people, because there are a lot of retired teachers out there who are very worried about this.
Right. Some of them who retire because of the climate
Exactly.
of violence that exists within our schools. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our mission is to empower educators and school staff to speak out about this and to demand that communities are safe from gun violence, not only school shootings, but what kids are coming into class from, what they're experiencing on a daily basis.
I always say that whatever we don't resolve in our society ends up in a teacher's lap.
That's right.
Right? Whatever we don't resolve in society ends up in the lap of a teacher, because in the classroom, you don't get to choose who's in there. You get everything. So Teachers Unify empowers and gathers the voices of retired and current teachers, staff.
Yep.
And do you take position statements? Tell me what else that you do.
So we work very closely with the union that actually the three co-founders all are members of, which is the American Federation of Teachers.
Okay.
Who they have been part of the aftermath and the conversation about school safety and the impact of gun violence since the tragedy. They came to Sandy Hook. We maintained a relationship with their leaders over many years, and then after the Parkland tragedy, the students really encouraged the unions to get further involved. So we work very closely with the union, and we run webinars and panels and have discussions about how do you talk to kids about gun violence, how do you allow them to bring this into the classroom, how do we help educators and school staff approach principals and school leaders when the drills are not trauma informed.
And
some of them
enough.
are heinous that kids and adults are going through. So we are working on some toolkits and resources for educators to help them through those kinds of things. And what we're finding is that everyone has a story.
Yeah.
They remember what happened in Newtown. It impacted their teaching. But every day, teachers right now are setting up their classrooms and they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
They're looking and saying, is this really the place where I'm supposed to hide? Is this the right spot? Is this where they're going to tell me?
Am I willing to die to save my students when I want to get home? My mother was a public school teacher for 32 years. And I know she would have. I just don't think she should have had to. Another thing that's really frustrating is when we don't offer education, in the absence of good education about alternative ways of asking for help and doing the drills, we get desperate and we do dumb things like saying, well, maybe we should put more guns in classrooms, which quite frankly, like it or not, I'm going to take a position now and say we don't have any data which tells us that would make anyone safer. That is something we say because we are scared, because we are desperate, but the data doesn't bear that out. Does Teachers Unify take a position on that?
100% we're against arming teachers. I mean, we say the same thing. The phrasing that we're using right now is that, first of all, it's absurd that a teacher, somebody who's talking about, who louds the concepts of nonviolence and we lift up those in history who have taken stances on that, and how do you make change in that way? And then you're going to strap on a firearm. It's a contradiction, and it's also incredibly dangerous. And you're right, there is no data. In fact, the data tells us the opposite, that if there is a gun in the home,
we know we're less safe.
Then we're less safe.
Yep. We know we're less safe. Another thing I really want to make sure we don't end this episode without talking about is there has been gun violence in this country long before Newtown. Newtown elevated the conversation to a point where it could not be ignored. But part of the reason we had ignored it before that was obviously racism. And obviously because we care more about people in certain zip codes over others. But before Newtown, there have been teachers in zip codes and in areas across the country who also had to go back and deal with a classroom with an empty desk because of community violence.
That's right.
Because of suicide. Because of a act of gun violence that happened to a singular person on one day. And those have to matter to us too. And I'm sure that Teachers Unify platforms and speaks to and makes a tent wide enough for all, not just mass shootings and just knowing who you are and knowing a little bit about your co-founders in preparation of for this, episode. Just really want to thank you for your committed work and your position and taking the stand. You remind me a little bit of Miss Rachel. I heard Miss Rachel do a graduation talk, and she said she was hoping for resources for her child. And she was saying, I hope someone would do something about that. And then she looked in the mirror and she realized that she would be that someone. And it sounds like you also had that moment where you realized that you would have to be that someone.
Again, tremendous responsibility, but I know that there are all of these educators and former and current and school staff who've joined our efforts. They are ready. They're worried. They're angry, and they want to be part of the solution. So it's definitely not something I do alone. And I just know that that's kind of the way that I work best anyway, is with a community of people. And we very much have that, both with our union and with the folks who've joined us from Teachers Unify.
So you did something really kind of exciting and really kind of scary this year. You stepped back from your full-time teaching job the first time ever since the Sandy Hook shooting, and you decided you're going to give this your full-time energy, support, and care. How do people reach out to you in case they want to reach out and be a part of Teachers Unify?
Yes, I am very humbled and excited to work on this issue full-time for the first time in almost 12 years. Where I was doing it after school every day and on the weekends, which I probably still will be doing at night and on the weekends. But please check out our website at teachersunify.org and see what we're doing and follow us on Instagram. There are a lot of back to school initiatives that are headed our way and out there, and we would love for people to join us.
That would be amazing. I always say to people, there are so many different flavors of activism and so many different groups. Everybody doesn't have to do the same thing.
Right.
As long as we are all here in the ecosystem of gun violence prevention, you can find a spot if you want it. And today's an opportunity to highlight Teachers Unify, to give lots of gratitude and respect and offer respect and care to teachers going back to school in the United States who have already gone back and will be going back this fall. And we can maybe all agree on one thing. We don't want to lose any more teachers to this or any more students to this. And in that, I think we can all be united. Thank you for listening. I hope that what you heard touched your heart and maybe encouraged you to think about things a little bit differently and get involved. Shared Humanity is produced by the Yale School of Public Health. Follow us on social media at Yale SPH and learn more at sph.yale.edu/shared humanity. Thank you to the Porvu Center and Yale Broadcast Studio for their support. We hope this episode empowered you to take action toward positive change and hope.